helpful to start out our discussion of these topics by focusing on a distinction that Jennifer Nagel makes between intuitive and reflective judgments. This is a distinction largely made in psychology and related areas of philosophy. So, on the one hand, we have what we might call intuitive judgments. These are judgments that we're conscious of, but there might be complex processes going on forming them, and we're not aware of these complex processes. So the kind of examples we're thinking of here, as Nagel mentions, things like facial recognition, where we're conscious that we're judging that this face belongs to somebody or this is somebody's face, but we're not conscious of the complex processes that are going on in our brain that allow us to come to that judgment. Similarly, with reading the emotions of others, we're often able to look at somebody and judge if they're happy, sad, angry, fearful, even though we are not able to have access to the complex processes going on that lead us to make those judgments. A final example is when we do simple math, like 2 + 2 = 4. These are some examples she uses of intuitive judgments. We also have similar things involving like understanding language or something like that. So we contrast that with reflective judgments, where there's sort of some explicit reasoning going on, and we're conscious of how we came to that judgment. And so when we have reflective judgments, we have a better grasp of why these judgments are true, because we have consciously reasoned through how we came to the judgment. And these sorts of cases are ones, these sorts of judgments are come about in a more slow way. We're slower to come to these judgments, but they're more flexible. We can do more things. We don't have to, in some sense, be biologically constructed or psychologically constructed in a way to do this. We can do that. We are much more flexible here. Some examples, she gives the example of long division. So when we go through long division or multiplication or something like this by hand, this is a sort of kind of reflective way of reasoning, where we come to a reflective judgment. We're conscious of how we came to it, but it's slow, but it is flexible too. Another example is sort of when you're trying to solve a crime or a mystery and you sort of weigh the evidence together and you think, oh, here's all my evidence, and you reflect on it and think about what the evidence suggests to you. That's a case where you are going through reflective rather than you're doing a reflective rather than intuitive reasoning. You're conscious of how the reasoning is going, which means you're much slower to come to these judgments when trying to solve a crime, but it's more flexible. It's usable in different sorts of situations. So what does this all have to do with judgments about epistemic matters? What does this all have to do with epistemology? Well, these judgments seem to be intuitive. So it doesn't seem like when we're trying to figure out when we have a case, whether somebody is justified or knows something, we're not applying some particular theory of knowledge or justification. We are just hearing about the case or maybe observing it in real life and making judgments of knowledge, justification, things like that. And in these cases, we're not conscious of the grounds on which we make these judgments. Also, we seem to make such judgments, I think, very frequently. So it makes sense we'd have some intuitive capacity for doing this. So here's an example. It's a Gettier example. So here's what we do. When we're giving a Gettier example, we describe a Gettier case. We describe the case to somebody, and we ask for judgments about whether the character in the example has knowledge. And these aren't judgments where somebody's sort of thinking about a particular theory of knowledge and thinking about whether the case meets those criteria. When we ask whether the character knows, we're just asking, what's your intuitive judgment about it? And most of us say the character doesn't know. And then we ask it for another intuitive judgment, whether the example is one of a true belief that's justified. And we say, yeah, it is. So this is supposed to show that knowledge is not simply justified true belief, and it does so by comparing our intuitive judgments about things like justification and knowledge.